Olá, pessoal, boa tarde, tudo bem? Prazer estar com vocês essa tarde de quinta-feira. A gente trouxe um conteúdo bastante relevante, reflexivo, para você comparar com seus próprios indicadores. A gente já vai começar com o conteúdo. Queria, antes de tudo, né, além de dar boa tarde para vocês, fazer um convite muito especial para quem está aqui. Você tem outro colega que trabalha na área aí de Inside Sales, ou trabalha com equipes de vendas e quer entender números, indicadores, fazer comparações. Essa empresa de Bridge Group é uma consultoria internacional que faz uma pesquisa exaustiva há muitos anos, eles são líderes nessa pesquisa no mundo e trazem comparações e reflexões que a gente não encontra em materiais aqui no Brasil com facilidade. Por isso a gente foi buscar, né, fora, trazer para a gente analisar. Então, chama esse colega para estar com a gente aqui ao vivo, ou mesmo depois que você assistir também pode passar o link do conteúdo para eles. Como é que a gente fez isso, tá? A gente gravou uma entrevista com eles para a gente poder legendar, porque nem todo mundo tem um domínio pleno do inglês para entender. Então, a gente fez essa entrevista no início da semana, a gente legendou a entrevista para que todo mundo, mesmo quem não tenha fluência em inglês, consiga entender todo o conteúdo, tá bom? Além disso, eu queria fazer um convite bastante especial para vocês. Nós estamos iniciando as inscrições para o nosso Inside Sales Week. É o maior evento de Inside Sales Week do Brasil. Tem palestrantes do mundo inteiro. É um evento grátis, uma semana inteira de conteúdo. E se você indicar alguns amigos, então você fica com esse conteúdo da semana por um tempo ainda maior para degustar e assistir e refletir com mais tempo. Então, se você ainda não se inscreveu no Inside Sales Week, nossa equipe vai colocar aqui no chat um link para vocês. Olhem, porque isso vai trazer ideias para vocês e insights para a operação comercial de vocês, tá bom? Então, olhem para o chat, já faça a inscrição e não deixe de convidar os seus pares, colegas, equipe, até líderes, né? Isso vão ser insights valiosos. Tem trilhas, são 5 trilhas distintas, uma trilha só para gestão, uma só de vendas, uma só para sales enablement, uma só de tendências. Então, não deixe de estar com a gente também no Inside Sales Week de 11 a 15 de setembro. Bom, no dia do fechamento do Inside Sales Week, 15 de setembro, ainda é meu aniversário, para a gente comemorar juntos lá, tá bom? Então vamos lá, pessoal. Vamos dar início ao nosso conteúdo. Vai aparecer a gravação da entrevista do Dani com o pessoal da The Bridge Group, com o Caio da The Bridge Group. Em seguida, eu vou voltar para a gente discutir alguns indicadores, contextualizar e conversar com quem tiver interesse aí no assunto. Vou estar à disposição aqui com vocês, fazer alguns comentários, tá bom? Então, vamos dar entrada na entrevista do Daniel Bounds, meu sócio, da Inside Sales Academy, e do Caio, da The Bridge Group.
Let's do it. Hey guys, welcome to our webinar. I have today a very special guest, Kyle Smith, managing partner of the Bridge Group. And we are a huge fan of your work here in Brazil. So Kyle, welcome. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
For those who don't know the Bridge Group yet, in the past, I had the opportunity to record with Trish Bertuzzi. I'm a huge fan of her work and her book. It's a Bible for us, work on sales, the sales development playbook. Can you tell us a little bit about the Bridge Group for those who still don't know you guys?
Of course, yeah. So founded by, as you said, Trish Bertuzzi in 1998, and really had the same point of emphasis since that time. So the last 25 years, we've been working with business-to-business technology companies to help to better enable the sales functions within them. That looks like a lot of different things once we actually get into the company, but we are a sales consulting organization that works with exclusively B2B tech companies.
Amazing. And you guys do a study every year about sales development, right? Is our focus here today. How long have you guys been doing this study?
2008. So we have a wealth of data that we've been able to collect over that time period. And yeah, like you mentioned, the research report is something we put a lot of time and effort into because it helps to inform the market in terms of their ability to benchmark, but also helps us in our actual consulting engagement so that we can compare individual client data to the benchmarking metrics that we have collected more holistically. So we're happy to publish it and put it out for everyone's consumption, but there's a self-serving capacity to it as well, which is it helps us on our strategy work to help center us do some cross-segmentation of data and some interesting work just around data collection and analysis.
Amazing. This is the one, sales development, metrics, and comp report. So since 2008, there's a lot of, so it's in 2008 here in Brazil, we didn't know what SDR development was. We're always a few years behind you guys, but it's good to can pick your brains, because here is something relatively new. I think for the past 10 years we're doing this, but it's growing, but still a new topic for everybody. So I look at your study. I also brought some data from Brazil, so we can compare a feel of the data, that the findings that you guys have in your study. So let's do it. The first thing that I want to talk to you, Kyle, it's about SDR's productivity. There's a few findings that you guys had in your report, and I want to compare with our reality here in Brazil.
Understood.
First one, it's daily activities. You guys found that, well, there's average of 100 activities per day for an SDR, and they are average like 40 activities on phone, 40 in email, 16 LinkedIn, 2 SMS text. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, median, but yes.
Okay, yep. Not average, it's median.
Yes.
Okay. And what about the distribution? Is 3% of the companies less than 10 average dials per day? Wouldn't that be a very small amount? It depends of the size of the business, of the model, of the prospecting. How you guys read this graphic?
Yeah, there's outliers on both ends of the spectrum. So I'll go on the high side first. I know you just asked about the low side, but on the high side, when we look at some of like the outsourced sales development organizations that we've partnered with closely, even our clients have used, in some of those instances, you see people who make consistently 150, 180 dials a day. That's abnormal. We don't see a whole lot of that now, but there are still organizations who are on the way high side of the spectrum. On the other side of it, it could be times when it's a very low deal value, highly transactional deal, where we are really pressing up against like maybe even going like self-service, and there's still a sales development rep involved in the process. In that instance, we have a ton of high value inbound coming in, a lot of responses to the inbound that happens via email, and even some use of automation being driven by a sales development rep. And the call volume just isn't quite as high because it's a transactional product. Maybe it's a $2,000 per year product where they've already raised their hand, said, I'm interested in this. And the SDR is really facilitating a handoff to an account executive. And there's not as much qualification built into that process. So there's outliers on both ends of the spectrum in terms of total call activity. And I think that's some of what you see reflected here. I think deal size, when we're talking about calls, is typically one of the best indicators for where you're going to be in terms of volume. But that median is actually a pretty good equalizer to help center yourself. Or if you're not one of those outliers where you don't have a $3 million a year product like an ERP or something like that, and you're not selling a $2,500 product, and you're somewhere in that middle range of 40, 50K, roughly in that range, then 104 is probably where you're going to need to be. Again, not understanding target market you sell into, target titles, that type of stuff. But yeah, 104 is usually a pretty good benchmark for productivity if you're looking at a sales development rep's output for daily activity.
And SMS is relevant for you guys in the US, because here in Brazil, WhatsApp, it's huge. I know that you guys don't use a lot of WhatsApp, but it's becoming very important for sales development teams here in Brazil. How do you?
I would say at this point, we talk about it a lot. I don't have a lot of companies using it. You see the data proves it out, right? Like 2 per rep per day is a very low volume. And so companies are hesitant to adopt it for a couple of reasons. One, legal compliance and lack of exposure or awareness of what rules and regulations there are around SMS. they're starting to become more educated. Legal teams are starting to actually allow for this to happen, knowing that it's one of the best possible communication channels for engaging with prospects. That said, it's still not widely adopted. And so we're seeing it start to make its way into the process, just not as much as I would like to see. But we're making our way there. One of the best use cases for it, actually, that I've seen right now, where we don't have as much trouble getting people to actually adopt, is after the SDR has actually had an initial conversation with the prospect. So we've already spoken, and we actually gain verbal permission on that call to use SMS or text as a means of communication for future follow-up, nurturing, confirmation of next meeting, whatever the case may be. So at the end of that call, I could say something like, hey, a lot of my prospects actually prefer to use text because they find it's an easier way to communicate, and it's a little bit faster for scheduling our next meeting or confirming our next meeting. Would that be okay? Like, yep, sure, that's fine. Great. Now we've gotten verbal agreement to open up that channel of communication and increase the likelihood that they will respond to a message if we do send it. So that's something we've had success with. Not so much pure outbound texting. Not as many people are willing to adopt that just yet.
Yeah, here in Brazil, outbound, there's still a lot of discussion. But with inbound, if someone has to talk to you, I think most of the SDR teams will use, and here in Brazil, it's WhatsApp, that it's huge for us. Every CRM tools here in Brazil, it's already integrated with a WhatsApp, so we have track of everything. But it's hard for us. It's another question that I want to question you. Here in Brazil, the young ESDRs are trying to avoid a lot phone and rely a lot on WhatsApp or email. Are you guys seeing a decrease of the use of the phone over the years?
I think it's just a source of a lot of debate rather than necessarily decreased usage. I think the benefit that we have with introduction of a sales engagement platform, so like a Sales Loft or an Outreach or name your sales engagement platform, what we get is amazing data on a per sequence basis. And so what we can do is take opinions and turn them into tested data that's been analyzed. So you could say that you feel like phone is not a effective method of communication, or that no one answers the phone. That's what we hear a lot. Well, nobody answers when I call. All my responses come via email. But what we can do is then bake those different touches into a full sequence or a cadence and test them. And we can see that on the performance metric that I care about, which is for 100 prospects you put into a sequence, how many meetings do we get booked on the back end of that, or how many meetings come out of pushing 100 prospects through. And so one that a sequence or a cadence that includes phone touches is always going to, at least as any data I've seen, outperform those that are more focused on just text-based communication. And so that's always an easy way to win over that argument, because ultimately SDRs want to make more money. They typically make more money by booking more meetings that yield more opportunities. And so that's usually a quick and easy win that I would go through anytime somebody is resisting or pushing back against the idea of using the phone.
Great idea. Let's try to apply this. Let's see if it works.
Let the data do the talking. Is always, we can always have opinions, and I'm never one to get stuck in my ways. So I'm willing to test just about anything that doesn't harm the company brand or crush our sender score by spamming people, or as long as there are not going to be long-term ramifications for a test, I'm willing to test just about any hypothesis and let data do the talking, because I have no misconception that we've solved every potential problem or have thought of every good idea. So anytime reps come with different ideas or approaches, I'm always willing to test things and like to do that frequently, and then let the data prove out what's working or not.
Because it's very contextual, right? Works in a different, it might works in a context and not work in a different context. So there's no silver bullets, right? We have to test to see if it works in our environment.
And it changes constantly. What works right now doesn't mean it will work 2 quarters from now. Buyer behavior changes, things are cyclical. As new technology gets implemented, as new trends pick up that we as salespeople adopt. So something that I'm doing that works well today if all of a sudden every sales rep in the world starts doing it, prospects adjust really quickly and then start to resist against that behavior. And so then they'd be more likely to pick up on something that's new or different, or just makes them, draws their eyes or awareness to a message in a slightly different way. So it also changes really, really quickly in terms of what's working or what's not. So we're always testing.
That's true. Here is some data from Brazil, from our friends from eTime. They have a report called Inside Sales Benchmark Brazil. It's very good. And I found curious, it's in Portuguese, so let me translate for you. The first graph is the average activities from SDRs, and in the second one, the average activities, prospecting activities from sales reps.
Okay.
So I found that in Brazil, it appears to me that we have a lower amount of activities, right? For most of you guys have 40 activities. It seems to me that in Brazil, SDRs, they do less activities than in your report. Oh, it's close, but I think still less. And of course, salespeople, they have other responsibilities. So most of them does just a little prospecting.
Still very, very, very low on the sales side. I think on our AE report, it's somewhere in the 40 to 45 range, if memory serves. So still lower on the AE side and a little bit lower on the SDR side. I wonder why. What do you think the reason is?
I think when we start to specialize our teams here, I think one maybe misconception is that salespeople, they don't have to prospect. They just rely on the demand generated by SDRs and BDRs. So I see a lot of teams where the AEs, they just don't prospect. And they're always complaining. The leads coming from marketing and maybe the appointments booked or not booked by the SDR teams. So I think it was a misconception about the model that we when we implemented here in Brazil, we maybe are making this mistake.
But who's making that misconception? Because I've never seen the actual model be built out where there aren't specific responsibilities for pipeline creation. So where are we getting lost? Because we know what the revenue number is. Let's just say the revenue number goal for this year is 50 million. And we know that the historical average win rate is 25%. So let's just say we need 4x coverage. So we need 200 million in pipeline. Then if you have a good plan, that 200 million in pipeline has specific responsibility. Marketing is going to own 40% of it. And then sales development is going to own the other 40% of it over and above what marketing produces. And then sales typically is still going to own, 10, 15, 20% of the overall source pipeline. So there's still 40 million in this scenario of pipeline that needs to be generated by sales. So my point being that typically is really well established and set out when you're thinking about annualized goals for the business. So where is a misconception coming into play that leads people to believe they don't need to self-generate pipeline?
I know a lot of teams here in Brazil. I don't know where the miscommunication happened or the misunderstanding, but there's a lot of teams here that the AEs, they don't have the responsibility to prospect. It's all with the sales development teams. And as a whole, I think it's a misconception because I think it's important for the sales person keep that muscle alive and also contribute with his relationship and to generate pipeline as well. I think it's my interpretation of the data.
Yeah, I would say two things. One, this goes for every single relationship. Uncommunicated expectations can be detrimental to any relationship, personal or professional. So having effectively communicated expectations is super important. So if the executive team is building a model that is requiring some level of self-created pipeline, and then it needs to be communicated down to the reps. The second thing that I would say is I have never seen, I'm not saying that it's never happened, I have never seen an AE receive quota relief because their SDR didn't achieve their performance metrics. So ultimately, if you're an AE, your quota is your quota. And while we can build a model and put all this supporting infrastructure in place to help you achieve your revenue objectives, ultimately it's your goal, it's your quota, and your commission is going to be based on your achievement of those goals. So having some level of control is something, maybe it's because I'm a control freak. I would always want to make sure that at least some percentage of that I am having my own direct control over, and not take for granted that somebody else is going to completely fill the pipeline with whatever is necessary to get me to my goal.
I think is the first great insight comparing our numbers to
Yeah.
your numbers. Salespeople, we don't have to rely 100% on the SDRs. We have to create our own pipeline as well. I think it's an important message to sales teams in Brazil.
Definitely. And the beauty is, if your SDRs produce all the pipeline that you need to get you to 100% of quota, all that effort that you put into self-generating your own just puts you into your accelerators. So even better. I think there's no losing if you're self-creating pipeline. You also become much less dispensable as an individual if you start looking at your ability to both create and close deals. That makes you nearly indispensable in terms of your value to the business. I don't need anyone else, and I by myself am a profitable individual to this business. That makes you really tough to ignore, dispense, get cut in a layoff, or be looked at if any headcount changes need to happen. There's, never mind marketable for every future position, there's just a ton of value in that.
Completely agree. Let's move on. This
one hurts.
What is happening? The number of quality conversations per day has dropped a lot the past years. What is your take on that? It's simply getting harder and harder to do it.
I think a couple different things. One, the availability of technology and explosion of sales development as a function, like you said, like maybe Brazil's had it for 10 years, this has had it probably for 30 in a more formalized way, definitely for 20 plus. When you have an increase in headcount whose sole goal in life is to call and connect with potential prospects, and then all of a sudden you equip and fuel them with tools like sales engagement platforms, like amazing data resources, then all of a sudden their phone rings more times per day. This is my assumption. I don't have data to back this up. This is just a hypothesis. The data is what we're looking at. My hypothesis as to why is because prospects are more inundated than ever with sales outreach. And so they have started to resist it in a much more meaningful way. At the same time or simultaneously, they have either shifted to remote work, and that exploded with COVID, obviously. So now getting direct dial information can be more challenging. Sometimes you just get a company mainline number that will send you in an endless loop. Like if you've ever called Amazon in particular, just to call out one, getting a human on the phone can be extremely difficult. So I think there's more and more of that. And those 2 or 3 things have led to less and less quality conversations happening per day. So it's just getting harder to get people on the phone.
I don't have data here in Brazil, but I think that it's the same phenomenon. It's happening here. And we look at a number of activities and a number of quality conversations per day. But we were talking before, and when we're looking at sale or SDR's productivity, is source pipeline the best metric that we can use to evaluate an SDR? What are your
I think so. So if you ever want to do comparisons with somebody you would consider to be in your peer group, and so for me, I'll work with 40 to 50 companies a year. And if I'm coming in from the outside, the immediate thing that I want to understand is not how many meetings do they book, not how many opportunities are created from the meetings that they book. I need to understand the source pipeline per year. That's my starting point, because that helps to qualify for average deal size, sales cycles, target market. It's a really good starting point, because if you and I both run sales development teams, you say your team's booking 15 meetings a month, I say my team's booking 10. It's hard for me to tell whether your team is actually outperforming mine. And the pipeline is usually a good way to understand where they're actually stacking up against each other. It also, why I don't jump to revenue is because it's still largely in the control of the sales development rep, because they're sourcing something that meets the qualification standards of the business. And let's make the assumption that the account executive is converting it also in alignment with the opportunity creation criteria that you've established. This is still largely in their control. And so if you come and you tell me that your team is producing $3 million-ish of pipe per rep per year, that I know, okay, we're at a pretty good starting point. That doesn't scare me. I think that there's a ton of profitability to be had in that metric. And now if you jump to revenue, now there's 100 other factors that I need to consider to know whether it's good or not. Like, how good is your AE team at taking an introductory meeting through to close? What else is popping up? Like, well, what's the loss? Now I need to start doing win-loss analysis. And it just makes the water really murky. So I like looking at the pipeline number. And also, this is something that becomes interesting that you can report up to an executive level for people who maybe are not as attached to or in tune with what an SDR does. Maybe they don't think about meetings, or they don't care about total number of meetings. Maybe they don't even care about total unit number of opportunities. But if you show them a sourced pipeline number, that's typically something that starts to capture the attention of an executive team and can validate further investment in the sales development function, which is one of the things we're constantly fighting to do. How do we get more headcount? How do we get more tech spend? How do we get more enablement spend? And those things can typically validate it if you report out on a sourced pipeline type metric, and then qualify on a per head basis to show improvements over time. I just love this metric. I find it extremely helpful in almost every context.
And I think it's a great insight for us as well, because I don't think it's very usual here in Brazil. We monitor or even evaluate our SDRs using this criteria. I see a lot of teams using number of meetings booked, number of meetings that actually happen, sometimes revenue, but source pipeline, I don't think it's very usual here in Brazil. So I think it's a great insight for our managers to start looking at it. Does do you guys use this metric to compensate SDRs, Kyle?
No, SDR leaders, yes, but not SDR managers. So, sorry, not SDRs themselves. SDRs themselves, my favorite is, depends on the company, but in general, my favorite is a 2-factor compensation plan. One based on meetings completed. So you book the meeting, but it has to happen. So meetings completed, and then the second would be on meetings converted. And typically that's either to a stage 0% opportunity. Some clients just go straight to stage 1. And I do those both just based on units. And then I always build, always uncapped, and then always build in accelerators. And I like monthly plans for everyone outside of, again, the outliers like ERP, that's a $5 million sale. They do like 3 opportunities a quarter, and that's like a really good quarter. Mm-hmm. Everyone else, I do monthly. So I monthly plans, 2 factors: meetings held and meetings converted to opportunities with accelerators.
Great. This is data from here from Brazil. The first one is actually sales. It's the most. This is what criteria we use to compensate SDRs. 84%, 28% meetings booked, 25% meetings accepted by the AEs, and 23% meetings booked. So I think there's great insights for what you just said. I think we are not using the right metrics to compensate our SDRs.
I understand the revenue one. I do. It aligns. Here's what I like about the revenue factor of comp plans. It aligns the incentives of the entire business, or at least of the whole revenue generating function. That means sales development, marketing, sales engineering, customer success, account management. Everyone works towards revenue goals. And so when you have aligned incentives, that does promote some some level of good team working behavior and cross-functional alignment that pushes everyone to the same objective, revenue. I like that aspect of it. What I don't like about it is two other things. One, very difficult for the SDR to have direct control over. What if I'm the one who gets the AE who can't close the deal? Like, your book, I'm going to give you a bunch of really good meetings that align to our ideal customer profile, that are qualified to the level of qualification we've all agreed on, and you just don't close them because maybe you're junior, you're green, you haven't sold very much, maybe you're just not particularly good at it. In either scenario, my compensation is massively impacted, and I've done exactly what the company's asked for me. I don't love that. The second thing would be timing. So SDRs, at least for the most part, are usually the lowest total compensation of anyone in the sales org.
Mm-hmm.
So we are taking the lowest compensated individuals and delaying their compensation so far beyond and also they're early in career. So if, let's say, you have an average sales cycle, not even that long. Let's say your average sales cycle is 4 months. That means right now I book a meeting for my account executive today. That converts to an opportunity next week. That means August, September, October, November. November, the deal closes. 30 days later is when I would actually be commissioned on that sale. That means I'm getting compensated for that deal in December for the thing that I did today. And so to me, that time frame, when an average tenure of an SDR is 16 months, 18 months, if you're lucky, then wait 4 to 5 months to compensate somebody for the quality work that they did doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think it's unfair, and it puts a ton of strain on somebody who probably has student loans, at least in the US, almost all of them do, and is not operating with a ton of discretionable spending or extra income. I don't like the idea of putting that much pressure on the lowest earning individuals within the sales organization.
That makes a lot of sense. When you put that way, I think there's a big discussion here of what is the best metric, but I've never thought in that perspective of if you book a meeting today, you might just get compensated for 4, 5, 6 months after that. It's really delays a lot, and it's disincentivized. This not a good incentive for the SDRs. Great.
Yeah, and you could do it, but just make it a smaller percentage. Make it 20% of the incentive compensation. Make it 25. I wouldn't really go over that, but if you have to, anything is better than 100. So just reduce that to whatever is acceptable that'll get a finance approval on that revenue component, and give something. It also, why should let's say it's the last day of the month. Let's say it's the last week of the month. What's the incentive for me to hustle and go get you 3 more meetings right now? There isn't any. It's the line of sight to what my efforts are today versus what my compensation will be is non-existent. There's no reason for me to make a strong push at the end of any relevant time frame, at the end of a month, at the end of a quarter. Why should I push? That money is 4, 5, 6 months away. So today is the same as any other day, and that's not typically the culture of a sales organization. Typically, it is more and more now. And so having factors that you can influence, that can influence your compensation, that are based on a shorter time frame, that are directly within your control, also promotes the right behavior to push for more and more now.
Completely agree. Let's go. There's a lot of things that I want to go over here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Or is it the next topic? It's cadences. I have the data here from you guys, and a data from Brazil also, and we can compare. In the US, the average attempt is 9 to 16, right? I think it's the average number of.
Yeah, average is 11. That middle graphic. Yep.
Okay. When we look at this Brazilian graphic, 11, it's not even at the graphic. We go to 1, 2, 3, 4 until 8, and then more than 8, because just 4% of our cadences have more than 8 touches, 8 attempts. Are we doing something wrong here? Are we quitting?
Maybe not.
Early?
So here's what I would say. I would plot it. I would run them longer. If I was going to test it, the way that I would test it would be on something over the top, a 20 touch sequence. If I wanted to just do like an actual experiment, what inevitably happens in every time we run a sequence is, if we think about a graph, y-axis is likelihood to connect or to get a prospect engagement, and the x-axis is the number of attempts. No matter what, every single time you run some type of sequence execution, that graph is going to increase steadily over the first, I don't know what the number is, it changes for everybody. It could be the first 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but no matter what, in every single sequence that you run, eventually that steep line at the beginning where every additional touch is dramatically increasing the likelihood to get a prospect to pick up the phone, respond to a WhatsApp, or respond to an email, or respond to a LinkedIn, it eventually levels off. And what happens when that graph levels off, that means each additional touch statistically is not significantly increasing your likelihood to get a response from those prospects. And so to me, with the test that I like to run to get it very specific to each individual client, like what we're looking at here is aggregated data across everybody. What does everyone do? If I'm looking at an individual client, I want to see, where does that graph break off and start to level out? Because that to me is the rate, that's the point of diminishing returns. And that essentially means to me, when that graph levels off, whether it's at 8 touches or whether it's at 12, that means that each additional touch that happens after that is not statistically increasing your likelihood of connecting with them, and should be spent reaching out to a new prospect. It's not like, okay, less activities per day. It's like, no, shift those 5 other attempts to a new prospect, because that statistically is more likely to get you more responses. And so it's just about finding that break point in the graph where it levels off for you as an individual if you're running your team. But the only way you can find the break point is if you go past it and see where that line starts to level off.
So start at 20 to see, to be able to to do this graph and understand where is the ideal point, right?
Yeah, and if that's scary for you, add 4 touches to whatever you're doing now and validate for yourself, no, the sequence that we had was the right number of steps. Because when we had our sequence built for 8, and when we extended it to 12, the graph leveled off at 8. Okay, great. You validated that you were correct in your assumptions, that it made sense for you to have an 8-step sequence.
And you guys, well, when we look at the average attempts over time, maybe we're still in 2014 for you guys. Like we're maybe it's starting to get so hard there in the US that is people's increasing the average attempts.
If you flip back to the quality conversations per day, that to me is exactly what you're seeing. So you see there's so many less conversations per day. Those graphs are inverse of each other. So one is saying we're having less conversations per day, so we need to reach out to every person more times to try to get that conversation. And so we are directly aligning our behavior opposite to the buyer behavior. The buyer behavior is less likely to pick up. We're reaching out more times to try to drive those conversations. That to me is the story there. Those two, this one and that total attempts in a sequence, are directly related to each other.
Right, great. Other thing that there's a lot of debate here in Brazil is about organizational structure and around SDR teams. So in your report, 64% of the SDR teams report to sales, right? And 24% for marketing. CEOs, I've never seen one report directly.
Small companies.
Yes. Okay, the CEO is the sales leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Exactly.
The
only other thing is if the small or really big and not in the middle. So really small, the CEO could be the sales leader and they report up that way. Really big, there could be a global VP of sales development, and sales development as an organization is so large, it sits outside of sales or marketing and it's its own function. There's 200 heads that report ultimately directly up to the CEO, but they have their own executive VP or SVP leader, but they're sales development specific. Both of those are more unique, as you can see in the data. It's a really small percentage.
And do you think there's a best option in terms of sales or marketing? Remember, everybody's always saying,
No.
sales development is marketing, but it
No.
makes more sense to be in the sales team.
No, there's not a best option. What I would say is that 24%, and in terms of the real, like in the wild things that I see, is typically the groups that I work with, like more hands-on, that do report into marketing, typically are heavy inbound focus. So they deal with a lot of inbound leads. When you're dealing with a lot of inbound leads and inbound lead management, response time, messaging specific to inbound, conversion of inbound, when that is critically important for the organization, oftentimes they are built as a function of marketing, and usually as a result of marketing kicking leads directly to sales and not seeing the type of conversion rate that they're hoping to for all that spend. And so then sales development like kind of grew out of necessity and kind of stayed in marketing. Alternatively, or the advice that I would have is just who knows the most about it and who cares the most about it. That's who it should report to. So if sales development is going to sit within sales, oftentimes you can have really nice alignment with the account executives. If you have shared leadership, shared vision, you have less fighting over like what was qualified, what's an opportunity, typically because the same individual executive team is communicating the same expectations. That said, if the sales leader in a specific organization doesn't know about or care about sales development, maybe that's not the best place for support. If they're not going to have a voice, if they're not going to be effectively supported and enabled, then and marketing would do a better job with it, then give it to marketing. Like this, it doesn't need to be a push and pull. I think there's a case to be made for both, but I default to who knows the most about it and who cares the most about it. That's where it should report.
Great. This is also always a great discussion. It's about the SDR to ratios. I think I don't have this data from Brazil, but I think the distribution, most of the companies have one SDR for every 2 AEs, right?
Yes. Yep.
What do you think as what criteria or what we should consider or take in consideration when decide this ratio?
Usually deal size is the easiest way to think about it, but then deal size usually ties to like number of target accounts. And so if your deal size is $1 million a year or $500,000 a year and you're an account executive, typically that means you're only going to have 100, 150 accounts, maybe 300, like on the upper end. If your deal size is 30K, usually you're going to have 6, 7, 8, 1,000 accounts. And so you can deploy an SDR to support 2 reps. And that means that SDR is going to have, like I said, 1,500 to 2,000 accounts that they could go after. If you try to do a 1-to-2 ratio for a true enterprise AE, maybe they only have like a total of 150 to 300 accounts. It becomes more difficult for them to effectively support those 2 reps over a long period of time if the ratio is 1-to-2. So that's typically where we see that start to expand out. And then also in larger organizations that have more complicated sources for pipeline, we see that ratio expand as well because the SDR is responsible for a lower percentage of the AE's pipeline. They get some from customers if they have legacy customers and don't have like this really well-defined customer success function. They get some from partners or the channel. And so really they're only now looking for where some orgs, 80% of pipeline could be through sales development marketing, maybe they only need 30%. So now all of a sudden you can spread an SDR across more AEs just to fill that pipeline gap that exists for you. So I think it's what are your different sources of pipeline, and then how many accounts can they effectively prospect into to work in support of those AEs and build your math that way. And then also how many opportunities can an AE handle? So if a fully staffed SDR can produce 20 meetings a month, can one AE handle 20? Probably not. One a day plus working active deals. Not many can do that. Okay, so right away, one's not going to work. If you go to 2 and it's 10 and 10. So sometimes it just happens by you realizing the physical limitations of individuals' time paired with your overall financial model for who's going to source what percentage of the pipeline.
Let me ask you, Kai, one thing it's a big discussion here, is not in the report, but I want to listen to your takes on it. When should we have an SDR, and when it's not worth to have a specialized team? What we have to take into consideration? Because I see a lot of teams here, since we are more in the beginning of this journey here in Brazil, I see a lot of companies specializing their team, and after a while coming back for someone selling full cycle, and with the time try again to specialize the team. When you think it's valid or it's worth it to specialize it?
We've done the math on this. It's been a few years, but we got all the way down to, I think it was 6,000 or 6,500, one of those, and ARR. So if you have something over 6,000 or 6,500, again, I can't remember exactly which one it was, but if you're over that, there is ROI to be had in the sales development function. If you're more normal, where you're 20K plus, 50K plus, it absolutely makes sense from an ROI standpoint. If there is a need to generate top of funnel pipeline or to book meetings for individuals who close deals, specializing that role, we see a massive impact with every organization we work with. I'm a little rusty on this topic because it's been a while since I've needed to sell sales development, because almost every company has it that I work with now. But yeah, the usually it's just a math equation. So you have your unit economics that dictate your success as a software company. Usually it's CAC to LTV is the guiding light metric that everybody looks at. And if you build a model that is inclusive of sales development, if your deal size is over, let's just say 7,000 to be safe, over $7,000, those ratios are going to be better with sales development included than without. And so that's usually the easiest thing to build it. But like I said, it's been a while since I've had to build those out. But if anybody's interested in it, I'm happy to revisit those. Those are fun conversations.
Kyle, other thing that I want to discuss with you is this finding about where reps are working. With the pandemic, I think accelerated a lot of the full home office and people working from home. And the thing that I want to ask you is, do you think there is a best model? Do you think SDRs working from home or in a hybrid situation, can they perform at the same level that working in an office?
Yes. Can they? Yes. Are they likely to? No.
Okay.
So, yeah. So here's what we saw.
It's hard,
Pandemic
right?
happens. Yeah. So this is the thing that I get a little bit frustrated with. So pandemic happens. Everyone has to work from home, but it's panic. Like all of a sudden, I mean, I think we saw unemployment spike to crazy numbers that we're not seeing, like only in that immediate aftermath. So unemployment spikes up. The whole global economy essentially shuts down. So everyone is scared for their personal, but I'll focus on professional. Scared about their professional future. Like, am I going to have a job? What's this economy going to look like? So as we shift to work from home, everyone is as productive as they possibly could be, because this is new. I want to prove my value to my business, and I want to prove I like working from home better. I don't have to deal with the commute. And most people that at least I've spoken with individually like working from home better. So we saw productivity actually increased in the immediate aftermath of the massive COVID shift. But then what happens is people get used to it, and then they fall back into the normal routine that they would, and now there's more distractions. And for sales development in particular, because I keep the conversation focused there, this is a extremely difficult job to do. And here's what happened. We didn't equip managers to be able to manage people effectively in remote environments. So it's not just the SDR's fault. Managers weren't equipped to maintain productivity over long periods of time in a remote environment. We didn't have the technology set up to do so effectively. And then also, you don't have these really important, to me at least, these little personal interactions with your peer group, which in this job, which is so hard, is incredibly important. So you get hung up on 2 times. You don't have somebody to just turn to and make like a lighthearted joke and be like, oh, just got hung up, or somebody was really upset they just got a cold call. And it doesn't diffuse any of that stuff. So it starts to let this like anxiety and tension and some of the negative aspects of the job build up without the relief of being immediately surrounded by a group of people who do the same job. I will also say 2 things. So statistically, not as productive as when in the office now. Immediate aftermath of COVID, people were more productive, but that's dropped back off. Global economic factors play a big role in that, but regardless, that said, now there is cool technology to make it as close to an in-office environment as possible, because the reality is not everybody's going to be equipped to hire back in office. Some people have dumped their commercial real estate for good reason, and plenty of people also have, rightfully so, validated that they as an individual are just productive working from home, and they're just not going to come back in an office. So if you want access to the best talent, you're going to have to do hybrid or remote. And so I think like there's company sales.
Only 10% in the responses that work 5 days in office.
Nobody's doing that. I don't have anybody doing that.
Really? I think I would suppose that here in Brazil, there's more than 10% people back in office and sales teams.
That's great. I love the in-office, and I mean, I think there's a ton of positive benefits to it, not just in the SDR role, but if you want, unfortunately, still like the beauty of sales versus other professions is that there is a number next to your productivity for the business. And so oftentimes you don't have to validate your value because your value is staring at everyone in a dashboard. That is the beauty of the sales role. That said, there are still little nuances to the relationships that you can develop, especially as an SDR, where you're going to need them if you want to go to an AE, let's say, for instance, or you want to move into management. Having more in-person exposure to other individuals within the company can help you out to develop other relationships, whether it's to get you access to an interview, but at a minimum to mentor you, to learn from, and to help you along the way in little softer ways. But I think the big thing is simulate the sales floor environment however possible. And there's some technology that now exists to be able to do that, which is really cool and helpful.
What about sales development motion? I found that also interesting, the findings that 45% of the SDRs do a hybrid job, only 3.6 just inbound only, and 15% outbound only. I think other thing that I hear a lot here in Brazil is that if someone is doing inbound, it's hard for them to do outbound. So there's most of the teams are specialized. You do only inbound or outbound, because when you do a lot of inbound, I think, well, people get used to a little bit lazy, and it's hard for them to do outbound also. I really thought that there was more, this was more reality there in the US too, but I think I was wrong, right?
Yeah, so, but the inbound only means that the sales development team only manages inbound leads. Outbound only means the sales development team only does outbound. The specialized, that 33%, means that there's SDRs that are just inbound and there's SDRs that are just outbound.
Okay.
So it is a decent percentage. And then 45% who are the same rep manages both inbound and outbound. And so
still it's 30,
still a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was higher, this number, the people that only the individual SDR only do inbound or outbound, but most do both at the same time.
Yeah, the number one reason why I see it being hybrid is when marketing is actually doing an amazing job, where the inbound leads that are coming in are right in the ideal customer profile. Like, so if we say as a business, we want to target companies 100 million plus in revenue, but all the inbound leads that are coming in are more mid-market or SMB leads, it's going to make a lot of sense to specialize. Like, just set your outbound team after your ideal customer profile, like have them go get those target accounts, but you still want to do something with all these leads you're getting. So have a specialized inbound team to manage those. Now, if the inbound leads you're getting in are already in your target accounts, now you have this complexity where I've been cold calling into this account for 3 months. And so now the inbound lead comes in and what, it goes to you? No, that doesn't work. So you're like, and who's to say that all my calling efforts and all my emails didn't lead to them downloading that white paper or submitting the contact us? So we see that the outbound actions of the sales development team oftentimes are driving them in through the marketing channel anyways, and where that's where we would lean more in that hybrid role, where don't steal inbound leads coming from an account that somebody's actively prospecting outbound into them and push it over to a separate function or team. It doesn't make any sense. Like, I have the intimate knowledge of the account. I've been working it for a couple months. I know all the key players. I'm going to be I'm best equipped to message most effectively to the account. So give me the lead.
Okay, I've been part of the discussion that happened in that situation. For how do you guys have a rule of how long have to take until this lead or these people who's working outbound is not supposed to get this lead? For example, I'm an outbound.
In a hybrid model, it's just your territory. So in the hybrid model, it's your territory, so it'd be your lead forever. In the specialized model, typically we would do like 60 days.
60 days?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay.
That can vary. Like, it could be 90, but usually somewhere in that 30, 60, or not 60 right in the middle is usually a good starting point.
Okay, that's a great starting point.
Yeah.
I think the last topic, it's ramping time and retention. These are also, I thought, very interesting, these findings. The first one is the experience required at hire.
Look at that.
It has dropped so much. Here in Brazil, it's hard to find someone that has 2.5 years of experience as SDR. It's like
no one had it. Yeah, same here.
No one has. But how do you explain this drop of the number of years required?
I think it's a couple different things. One, I think that what was called inside sales, the account executive function has blossomed and has become something beautiful to see. But it used to be so. People could keep me honest, but if you're looking at 2010, my assumption would be it was SDRs and field reps.
Okay.
And now field reps, the number of field reps has dropped like crazy. There's still reps who sit in territory, but how much field selling do they actually do? Very little. So then there's these inside sales reps. And then you went from perpetual licenses or physical infrastructure to SaaS. It's the explosion of SaaS. So now you have a bunch of people who are selling recurring licenses at 30 to 50K, and they can do that remotely. So now there's this other little middle carve out that was created with this account executive function who sells from a centralized location, or an inside sales rep or an account executive in the way that I think about it today. But that's not the same AE that was in 2010. So I think the relationship between the SDR and the AE shifted somewhat. So it wasn't just like this, you were booking meetings for a field rep and then you had to take this huge leap to get to the next level. There's all these little smaller steps to take in between. So now there's a nice softer entry point to take somebody who has, even a recent college grad or 1 year professional experience, not even SDR experience, that they can enter into, because the barrier to the other levels have come down so much. So just pushed everything down as field reps became AEs, and it kind of trickled all the way down to sales development, where now we can take less tenured folks.
So is that experience not an SDR, an experience as an SDR? It's a professional experience as
exactly
kind of experience, right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. But the ramp time didn't change a lot.
Pretty flat. Yeah, it's pretty much flat.
3 months. Now I have data from Brazil to contrast with you, because I think here the average is higher. Here is the ramp in month, but okay, it's a salesperson. We didn't have the SDR number. For a sales rep, for any, it's 49%, 0 to 3 months, 34%, 4 to 6 months. Well, there's just a, 14.
I would be shocked. That is a shocking number to me.
Why?
49% in 0 to 3 months. AE to ramp to full productivity, that means that they are making their quota. AEs are typically gold on a quarterly basis anyway. So how could you possibly achieve quota in your first quarter of employment? I understand that these are survey data, and all you can do is take the respondent of what the respondents tell you. I would love to see that. How? Because to be able to achieve a fully ramped quota in your first quarter as an account executive would be shocking to me. Typically, we see that is more like 4.5 to 5, maybe even 6 months, and that is largely dependent on deal size. 0 to 3 is shocking.
There's here analysis by average deal size. It's in our currency reais, but for analysis, I think it's somehow comparable. Okay, here says this is an MRR on $2,000.
Okay.
This is 0 to 3 months, 4 to 6 months, 7 months or more. Between $1,000 and $5,000 it's really close. And when the average ticket size it increases plus 5K plus, and this actually has a change of the numbers. But
okay, that makes sense. I would expect that's the same we see. As deal size increases, it takes longer to ramp up, which makes sense. I totally get that. Yeah, I think the ramp up specifically for sales development is really interesting, because for sales development profitability, months at full productivity is the number one metric that is likely to determine how profitable your sales development team is, because the average tenure is only, I think, 16 months. And so if you are achieving 16 months in terms of your average tenure, but it takes 3 months to ramp on average, you have 13 months at full productivity. That's a really short time period. For AEs, your average tenure is probably 2.5 years. So if it takes a little bit longer to ramp, an extra month to ramp, an extra 6 weeks to ramp, it's not as impactful as if it takes you an extra month to ramp an SDR. Like now you're down to 12 months of productivity. That's a really tight time frame to be able to get a lot of value out of that individual. And so we're constantly working with teams to try to ramp them faster and keep them longer so that we can increase that metric, that months at full productivity metric. How do we get them ramped in 2.5 months instead of 3.2? And then how do we keep them 17 months instead of just 16? And there's 50 different things that we would do to impact that. But that months at full productivity is usually a good indication of how profitable is your sales organization or of your sales development org.
And what is, you said 15 things that we can do to increase or to decrease this time. What do you think is the most important thing or the most impactful thing that we can do to reduce this ramp time?
Let them do stuff while they're ramping. Don't put them in a classroom for 3 weeks and have them watch videos and listen to classroom style presentations for 3 weeks. Make them do stuff that tests the knowledge constantly. So if you're going to introduce our buyer personas, have them then need to present to you what our buyer personas care about, and go find me 5 of them on LinkedIn and tell me what you thought was interesting about their profiles on LinkedIn. And then if you're going to tell them about how specifically our product's value aligns to those personas, have them develop a script and role play it and say it 10 times. I want to hear you say it over and over and over again. If you're going to train them on how to use SalesLoft or Outreach or Salesforce, then have them go and sit, and instead of just shadowing a rep, have them drive the system. I want you to log the activities. I want you to navigate using SalesLoft, Outreach, Salesforce, and whatever other tools you're using. And maybe you don't have a headset on yet. The person next to you, your mentor, has the headset. They're actually doing the talking, but you're driving your systems. So like practical hands-on application of all the different little pieces of knowledge that you need to get, but tested and practically applied, like get you speaking and doing things a lot in those first 2 to 3 weeks, so that when your traditional onboarding ends and you get put at your desk to go do the job, you're not like basically learning all over again. Like, I don't remember any of that. And then you just keep looking to the person next to you to remember how to do everything that you just spent two weeks doing. Has to be practical application of the knowledge of the onboarding process.
Great. I think the same thing. This is tenure.
Yeah.
The average SDR stays in the job for 1.4 years, right?
Yeah, correct. Yep.
Okay. And here, I don't know if it's a generational thing. I work with a lot of young SDRs, and they want to be promoted after 3-4 months on the job.
Of course.
Want to, and 1.5. This is the data that I'm going to use a lot to show that, well, the average is 1.4 year. It's not as fast.
I would say not only this, but Matt Bertuzzi on our team, who's our head of research, who builds this beautiful report that we're looking at, he also did analysis. It's a couple years old, but he did one using LinkedIn to gauge what we determined to be the success rate of a promotion based on your tenure as an SDR. And basically, we found that the break-even point was 18 months. If you get promoted to an account executive role prior to having 18 months of experience as a sales development rep, you are more likely to fail in that next role, meaning that you're not even in it after 2 quarters.
Wow.
And so when reps get promoted too fast, there's exceptions to this rule, of course.
Yes.
But if you get promoted too fast, you're exactly what everyone would think that you are, not ready. And if you're not ready and you jump to that role too quickly, you're not doing yourself any favors. I know everyone wants to do it. I did too. I was that person. After 6 months, I was like, okay, I'm done with this SDR thing. Let's go. If you go too early, you are not ready, you don't have enough experience, and ultimately what happens is you will fail, and there is less of an appetite to deal with failure in an account executive team than there is in a sales development team. Sales development is typically more of a nurturing environment where we know the number one point of emphasis is skill development and turn you into the future sales professional that you could be. When you're in an account executive role, it's give me the revenue. If you didn't hit your number first quarter, you're like, okay, pip. Second quarter, see you later. And so if you don't make that jump too soon, make sure that you're maximizing not just total number of calls or ops that you're sourcing or whatever, but knowledge gained through that process. And I think there's little things you can do along the way. Go join in more of the discovery calls or demos that you book for your account executives. Tag team or jump on a call with an SE that you normally wouldn't. As you get more tenured, like see if you can get more exposure to the deeper parts of the sales process while still making your number. You still have to make your number, but work with your manager to see if there's little ways that you can get exposure to the other aspects of the sales process and test your ability to execute a full discovery call. Can you run a demo? Like you can do, so your first year, just be an SDR. And then in those last 6 months, be an SDR, a top performing SDR, and start to do some of the skill development that would set you up to be an AE. Don't jump to the AE role and then assume you're going to be able to figure it out once you get there, because you likely won't.
Kyle, it's amazing this talk with you. So many insights, so many learnings. As I said, we are a few steps behind in this journey. So it's so good to can look at this data and analyze it with you. Thank you a lot. It's a pleasure. If you want to leave a message to our audience, I know you guys are not working in Brazil yet, but if you want to leave a final message to our audience, feel free. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to be here. If anyone wants to talk or brainstorm about their team, I love talking about sales development. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Happy to chat with you or brainstorm ideas at any point.
Hope to. We throw some events here in Brazil. Hope to see you here in Brazil soon.
I'll have to make a trip.
Have you ever been to Brazil?
I have not, but my wife has 3 friends in her grad school program who are all in Brazil, so they've been trying to get us to go down. So I think in the next year or two, we're going to make a trip down to see them.
If you come, let me know. We'll keep in contact to talk about future events here in Brazil. Thank you a lot, Kyle.
Thank you very much for having me.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Muito legal, Dani. Muito, muito legal. Gostei bastante do conteúdo. Eu tinha já lido a pesquisa anteriormente, até dei umas aulas no curso de liderança do ISA com alguns desses dados, mas ele explorou, foi mais a fundo, parabéns, gostei bastante. E o pessoal gostou? Tem algumas questões no chat, vamos responder?
Vamos lá. Tem algumas perguntas aí. Foi uma conversa muito proveitosa, tirei várias dúvidas e muito legal poder fazer esse contraste com a realidade americana. Estão um pouquinho à frente, como eu falei, nessa jornada aí, acho que a gente pode aprender um pouco com eles. Mas vamos lá, gente. Time, coloca as perguntas aí aqui na tela que a gente responde. A gente tenta responder, vamos lá. Pergunta do Wheeler. Com a pandemia, conversas de qualidade diminuíram, muitos preferem mensagens ou e-mail. Como que a gente muda isso no curto prazo sem perturbar muito o prospect? Acho que a pandemia dificultou mesmo falar por telefone. Muita gente, como a gente estava falando, está em home office, que sem dúvida dificulta um pouquinho. Mas como é que a gente pode fazer para não perturbar o cliente, mesmo sem o telefone? Lúcia, o que você acha?
Eu acho que tem uma questão do telefone que, como as pessoas não estão no escritório, eles não conseguem encontrar as pessoas por ramais, a maior parte das ferramentas são telefones comerciais, até por LGPD, você não pode ligar para números pessoais, né? Nem obter essa informação, a não ser que seja por indicação ou por um dado que o cliente colocou e permitiu que você entre em contato, que é o mais comum, que é mais fácil de você falar com a pessoa. Então, realmente existe uma dificuldade e sempre que me perguntam a respeito disso, eu acho que assim, depende da persona que você está falando. Tem gente que prefere a comunicação por e-mail ou prefere a comunicação por WhatsApp e outros por telefone. Nos Estados Unidos, eu passei 2 semanas agora em julho, nos Estados Unidos, na casa da minha irmã, eles usam mala direta. Você pega seu caixa de correio todos os dias, no final da tarde, e tem uns 5, 6, 7 malas diretas, coisas que a gente não vê no Brasil há décadas. Sei lá, acho que faz mais de uma década que não chega nada na minha casa de mala direta, ou chega muito pouco, não sei, na casa de vocês, imagino que é a mesma coisa. Então, assim, tem uma questão que é cultural e tem uma questão que é do momento. As novas gerações, elas não trabalham mais com o telefone, elas se falam por mensagem, elas acham esquisito ligar no momento que você deve passar uma mensagem. Então, tem uma série de fatores. Já outras pessoas não preferem. O telefone continua sendo um meio efetivo, mas no ambiente profissional. A questão é que está difícil você conseguir se conectar para o meio profissional. E quando você liga por um celular, se não for muito objetivo e tiver alguma coisa de muito valor para falar em muito pouco tempo, você vai interromper alguém que certamente está ocupado, porque no B2B a maior parte das pessoas estão ocupadas. Então, se ela não pediu para você ligar, se ela não deixou nenhum contato, você está fazendo isso de uma forma ativa, uma cold call completa, se não tiver técnica, não tiver muito orientado para fazer de uma maneira muito rápida e eficiente, dificulta muito mesmo ser por telefone. Não estou dizendo com isso que não tem que ser, não, tá? Acredito na prospecção telefônica, acredito nas cadências mistas, entender a tua persona, o produto que você vende, a proposta de valor e como é que você chega nesse momento. É mais fácil entrar com um e-mail inteligente, com uma mensagem no LinkedIn inteligente, mas inteligente, customizada. Eu estou, assim, desacreditando em mensagens padrões, desacreditando em cadências padrões, está tudo muito parecido, todos nós estamos recebendo uma quantidade gigantesca de e-mail e de mensagens também, de outbound, e isso vai tornando as pessoas resistentes a isso. A resistência está aumentando, então é a questão do uso da criatividade mesmo e customização.
Personalização, eu acredito muito nisso também, estava pensando nisso. É muito diferente quando você recebe uma abordagem que você sabe que realmente foi construída especificamente para você, que a pessoa entendeu o seu contexto, muda drasticamente. Então, acho que personalização, para mim, também, eu acho que é o principal ponto para responder a pergunta aí do colega. Vamos lá, tiveram outras perguntas, gente? Quais métricas são possíveis no Brasil para a gente avaliar vendas em geral, based on the global? As métricas a gente pode utilizar para avaliar vendas? Falando do tema específico que ele trouxe algumas métricas que eu não sei se você concorda, Lúcia, mas eu acho que me parecia que não eram muito usuais a questão do pipeline agendado, usar essa métrica como um critério. Ele já tinha me falado antes, que ele falou assim, eu amo essa métrica, a melhor métrica para avaliar a produtividade de SDRs. Eu acho que não é muito comum, então acho que é um insight legal, a gente começar a monitorar esse pipeline agendado, não só vendas, conversão dos agendamentos, no show, número de reuniões agendadas, que são métricas, eu acho que mais usuais, mas eu gostei muito dessa métrica.
Eu acho que é um insight, mas assim, pelo que eu percebi e em toda a pesquisa e no direcionamento, são empresas com faturamentos maiores, com MRRs maiores, faturamentos maiores, e muito do trabalho é feito de outbound. Então, num trabalho de outbound, se você não tiver um pipe agendado de valor, você não paga o profissional que está fazendo, né, as qualificações. No Brasil, muitas das equipes são inbound, e no inbound, você não tem muita noção de qual vai ser o tamanho do deal quando você está agendando, né? Só tem depois que o executivo aceita e faz a reunião e todo o processo. Você ter uma ideia de pipe, mas no outbound eu acho que faz todo sentido. Mas eu acho que a pergunta da Valéria, ela se referia mais à venda, na minha interpretação, tá?
Uhum.
Valéria, na nossa visão, aqui na DNA, a gente trabalha muito com volume, né? Previsto e realizado, qual é a minha meta e quanto eu vendi em reais. Todas as taxas do funil, desde o início do topo do funil, quanto eu descia. E uma coisa que eu tenho achado muito importante, que muitas empresas com inbound perderam o hábito, é de medir o número de vendas que os executivos fazem de geração própria. Tem muito executivo de vendas que só trabalha com lead inbound. O mercado está mudando, as ferramentas estão mudando, está ficando cada vez mais difícil e caro a geração de lead inbound. Nós temos que voltar para o ritmo e ganhar eficiência em geração de leads. Tem muita gente muito enferrujado para prospecção na área comercial. Então, assim, eu sei que as estruturas de inbound, de outbound, elas aceleram e dão produtividade para o executivo de vendas, mas em alguns negócios existe a ociosidade desses executivos de vendas, eles não têm agendas com reuniões completamente... Eles não têm agendas cheias de reuniões, seja agendada por SDRs ou por BDRs, né, por SDRs ou BDRs. Então, eles precisam gerar a própria agenda. Eu acho que isso tem sido uma quebrança, uma quebra e uma dificuldade, tem uma resistência muito grande de quem ficou confortável nos últimos 5 anos aí com o inbound bombando, a pegar e querer fazer uma cadência outbound, e é importante, no outbound vem deals maiores, você alcança públicos que muitas vezes não são alcançados de forma digital. Todo mundo está no digital, mas nem todo mundo está prestando atenção nisso, né? A gente tem pessoas que são mais digitais, mais aptas a receber esse tipo de anúncio, e tem outros tipos de empresário e empresa que compram serviços de formas diferentes e que vale a pena apresentar a tua proposta de valor. Então, para mim, as métricas seriam os volumes de vendas, as taxas de conversão no funil, o número de deals que você gera em cada etapa do funil, as taxas gerais, não só as taxas de uma etapa para outra, mas as grandes taxas de momentos que são importantes no teu processo. Isso, para mim, é fundamental. E a geração de vendas dos executivos por eles próprios, né, ou por outbound. E muitas outras, você podia falar margem, você podia falar de desconto, você poderia falar em outros segmentos de uma série de outras, de métricas específicas, né?
Legal, legal. Temos mais perguntas da audiência, gente? Se tiver, coloca aqui. Deixa eu ver. Obrigado, Raquel. Que bom que vocês gostaram. Particularmente gostei muito. Teremos, legal, Robson, aproveitar aqui que a gente está aqui junto. Em setembro, como a Lúcia falou no início, de 11 a 15 de setembro, a gente vai ter o Inside Sales Week. Vão ser dezenas e dezenas de conteúdos como esse. E espero que vocês estejam lá. A inscrição é gratuita. Então, a gente colocou o link aí no chat. Se inscrevam, convide os amigos. A gente vai ter ali dezenas e dezenas de conversas como essa durante o evento.
E palestrantes internacionais, né, nacionais e internacionais, são 5 trilhas, assim, dá para... Não só se inscrevam, como convidem amigos. Se você se inscrever, você vai ter acesso ao evento durante a semana. Se você convidar amigos, você estende a tua presença na plataforma por 1, 2, 3, 4, até um mês aí que você possa ficar e poder digerir a quantidade de conteúdo de gente de alto nível, em Inside Sales, com vendas B2B. Então, fiquem à vontade, inclusive para sugerir temas, se quiserem conversar com o nosso time, porque alguns slots já estão fechados, mas ainda tem slots para alguns palestrantes. Então, se vocês tiverem interesse em algum tema em particular, deem sugestões para a gente, deem no chat, deem nos vídeos, porque nós ainda vamos buscar especialistas em qualquer lugar do mundo e vamos trazer para o nosso evento, tá bom? Acho que é isso, né, Dani?
Maravilha.
Hoje foi até um pouquinho mais longo.
Pouquinho, a conversa estava boa ali com o Caio, a gente entendeu mais. Muitíssimo obrigado a todos que participaram aqui, espero que vocês gostem. E, de novo, setembro estão todos convidados, intimados para participar do Inside Sales Week.
Perfeito. Um abraço, pessoal. Obrigada.
Tchau, tchau.
Tchau, tchau.